Awesome. Well, Mike, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and we can let the rest of the attendees kind of just come in as they please as we get going. But for everyone, welcome to Gembah's Final Hour. I'm not Henrik Johansson. I know that appears to be me, but I am Stephen Blustein. I'm one of the co-founders here at Gembah, and very excited to bring to you today Michael Kynitz, who's named Yeti's head of operations in July 2018 and promoted to senior vice president in February of 2020. And prior to joining Yeti, Michael served as the chief procurement officer, vice president of supply chain at SunPower Corporation. Within his responsibilities, Mike's team developed and executed SunPower's sourcing strategies for direct and indirect material, along with a strategy for sustainability leadership, with a total expenditure of $2 billion annually. Wow, that is a big number. He has led a variety of leadership positions across the supply chain spectrum, from purchasing, sourcing, warehouse management to engineering and commodity management. We are very, very excited to have Mike as our expert here at Gembah. And you can book Mike in terms of the expert network here at Gembah, but very excited for him to lead his final hour today on supply chain management. Mike, thanks so much for being here today.
Great. Well, thank you, Stephen. And welcome everyone to the supply chain management overview as part of Gembah. And I'll walk you through some pieces and a little bit of what we're working at, what we see in 2021, and hopefully leave a fair amount of time at the end for Q&A as well that we can facilitate as we go forward. So as Stephen said, I've over 30 years of supply chain experience. Really, if I characterize it, I won't go very long on this, but the first 20 years were with the large, more of your traditional academy companies, Intel, Honeywell, Whirlpool, and more recently, mid-size and currently with some small companies. So the focus I've had is really on how do you put the infrastructure, the right processes, the right tools, the right people in place for fast-growing businesses and enable that business to scale efficiently. As many of you know and see, if you're in an environment today, it's growing fast. You need to be able to scale your business effectively and not linearly as the business goes up. So what I'll cover is really an overview of, first of all, what we're seeing in supply chain in 2021. You'll hear a lot, one of the big buzzwords in supply chain currently is resiliency. And we'll go into a little bit of detail of what that means and what we see with supply chain resiliency overall. I think a lot of you are facing logistics constraints today, and we'll go into a little bit of what's happening with some ideas and some options of best known methods and practices. We'll also talk to planning and the bullwhip effect and what's happening to demand signals out in the market today and what's happening to supply signals in the overall supply chain. And that drives into the commodity constraints that you're seeing. So we'll go through each of those in a little bit more detail and then leave time for Q&A for everyone.
Awesome.
So from a resiliency standpoint, and what do we mean by that and what are we seeing? In 2020 with COVID, everybody saw what the impact and what the need to better understand your supply chain is. That goes around, hey, if I have a tier 2, they can't manufacture. We have, there's issues on international shipments, geopolitical issues with, Amazon and UPS, FedEx demand skyrocketing. So all of those pieces played into the importance in understanding your supply chain and building one that can handle more than just one short-term, one impact out there. So some things to think about, and I'll walk through these in a little bit of detail, and then some of the actions, give you some examples that I've taken in the past as well. The first part is alternate sources. So it's an easy thing to say. It does take time to invest, and especially for some of you, you have to have enough scale to really start expanding and creating alternate sources as well. So I would definitely say you start with one, but expand as you grow your business. The ideal part that I try to manage our organizations to and teams to in the past have been have a primary. So they usually get 50% plus of the business, have a secondary supplier, and then always be bringing somebody new along that's going to be a disruptor. And whether that's a disruptor in terms of cost or in terms of technology or capabilities, but someone who's pushing the first two, because the first two can always become somewhat, somewhat complacent in what they're doing. So you want to have the three of them together. That works optimally, but you'll have to do that as you scale your business up as well. Tier 2 management, I think, is a critical part that when you talk about resiliency, a lot of companies, a lot of people faced this year. It's easy to say, I have a supplier who's, COVID hits, China gets shut down. I have a supplier who's based in Mexico or in Vietnam, and they're not going to be impacted by it. If it's a component, it's one thing to say that component comes from Mexico, that component comes from Vietnam. It's something else to understand what all the components that go into it are. If you go back, there were a number of electronic components, key control boards out there that were built in Wuhan, small chips that were constrained for months because, and they went into larger control boards and then of course went into larger items. So you started to see where, even today you're seeing where the auto industry is having to shut down lines and shut down factories and plants because of the semiconductor shortage. And, the buyer may be looking at it saying, I don't have a semiconductor, but you have to kind of keep digging in a couple layers deep. So it's important to understand what goes into all the next level of components that go into the products you purchase. The other piece that will continue to be critically important as the demand swings shift dramatically in 2021 is just your relationships with your suppliers. I'll go back to when I was at Yeti, as COVID hit and people were fighting for capacity, the ability to have really strong relationships with your suppliers was the most critical item to get your unfair share of capacity and deliveries and everything else. And developing those informal relationships and investing the time in doing it may not seem like it pays off a lot today, whether that's, the historical items of going to dinner with the suppliers, spending time, more personal time with them, or other just areas, especially in today's environment where you need to become much more creative. Spend the time. It's time invested today for results and improvement in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Oftentimes when I talk with new entrepreneurs or even existing entrepreneurs who have strong business relationships, I often talk about the relationship. What kind of benefits have you seen in terms of getting out of really developing the relationship early in the project with some of these key manufacturers?
I think I think one of the biggest ones up front, as you talked about, is a lot more transparency in the cost, right? So it's one thing to say, hey, I'm going to send a piece of paper over for a quote. He's going to send it back. We'll sit across the table. We'll kind of negotiate for a while. We'll play the game, and then we'll set a price and we'll move forward. If you have that relationship and you're really approaching it as we're both working together to develop a solution, you're developing the solution together, and you're not playing those games of, well, my cost is X and your cost is Y, and here's what I'm going to pay, and the back and forth traditional, car dealership negotiations. It's really, how do we create the best product that we're going to win in the market with? And, I've seen it where, I walked in, and as you develop the relationship and you develop the solution, you exceeded any cost targets you ever thought you were going to hit. And you kind of go, well, wait a second, this blows away anything we were looking for. So that's the first part. Second part really helps you develop a timeline, and you can understand if the person you're working with is providing a realistic, capability and timeline or not, right? So they may come out and say, hey, I can deliver this in 3 weeks. And you go, okay, now, do they really know what they're doing? Have I walked their lines enough? Have I understood their manufacturing enough to know what they're, what they can actually do?
Yeah.
And then finally, when you do get into constraint situations, and, I think the world today there's all kinds of constraints, whether it's building material or semiconductors or what have you, or bikes and fishing equipment. There's constraints everywhere, and they're not allocating, they are doing some allocation based on company size and customer size. There's a lot of allocation of time and really the A team of customers based on the relationship. And if you have that relationship with them, you can sit there and say, hey, I've got this project, we're working on it together. So-and-so is okay, but he's a B player. I need your A team sitting on this, on this to make it happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've even seen it like in the final hour where you need to have more people or more labor on a product that they'll bring it in and have other labor that's coming from outside to help you finish your goals and whatever time frame that you need if you're running in crunch hours. So yeah, I think that point is critically important.
Exactly. Yep. Thank you. Moving forward a little more on the supplier management. One thing you'll see in what I've seen from obviously a lot of the larger companies have very methodical supplier management programs with scorecards and quarterly business reviews, et cetera. But even as I've worked with some startup companies and smaller companies, it's still critical to set and hold your suppliers accountable to your expectations. And what you see inside of a lot of these suppliers, they're trying to do what they can, but they don't necessarily know what it is you want as a customer. So be very clear, document expectations, and make it clear to them that you're going to measure them against those expectations. And then finally, in terms of resiliency, is diversify your countries. It's easy to say, and historically everyone said, hey, let's go to China. You can counter that and say, let's go to Mexico, let's go to Vietnam, let's go to India. Diversification, I think, becomes especially important in today's climate, where you have opportunities to move from, if inflation comes in one location, tariffs come in another location, et cetera, you can manage and balance each of those as well.
And Mike, how early do you do that when talking about alternative sources and then looking at country diversification? How do those play into it in terms of starting out as you're producing versus your Yeti and you're full blown and you're in full production with millions of units? I mean, where does it go in the time frame? Right.
So if I characterize it, I'll just use terminology here that hopefully carries forward, is you traditionally want to do your limited launch with one supplier, because then you can do the iterations and turns with them. Then you want to go into high volume with that supplier and then add on another. So typically I would say once you've shifted from a limited product launch into high volume, you're bringing that ramp up with supplier one, and then supplier B you're bringing on relatively quickly after that.
Awesome.
I'm going to give you an example of what we did at Yeti and some of the key takeaways on it, and then I'll get into really things to look at as well. But when I came into Yeti, the soft goods supply base was based in China. It was a high risk area to the business. We were concerned about both cost management, but really continuity of supply as well. So from what actions were taken, we looked at both the existing supply base and new suppliers and looking at what countries we wanted to go to. And we looked at things that included duties and tariffs, what they were today, where they were projected with kind of the tariff back and forth that was going on at the time. Did a lot of analysis on labor costs, high labor content products as well going into it. And then what the countries were good at, right? So different countries, different regions of the world have different sets of expertise that you want to take advantage of. And then both internally and externally, we developed a project schedule that said, we're going to move this material. These are the countries we want to go to. These are the factories we want to go to, et cetera. And what we ended up doing within 1 year, we were able to shift all of the supply, the entire soft goods supply chain from China to 3 new countries with 5 different factories. And we were able to reduce the cost, reduce the risk, avoided the tariffs that came in as well. So it came together, and the key pieces that, of a takeaway for this team is, first of all, transparency and communication. So when we got into the meetings with the suppliers, we were transparent that it's a high risk for us, and you can be part of the solution and move to a new location with us, or you may not be. And if so, we'll work with you on doing a gradual ramp down of the business and transition of the business. We had very clear project plans that we executed against, and we communicated those projects with not just internal, but also with the suppliers, and our progress against those areas with the suppliers. What I'll touch on is really things for this team to think about when you're thinking about diversifying and moving, whether it's, hey, I'm in China today or the US today, and I want to go somewhere else. First and foremost, one of the things to look at is what's the region and their expertise, right? So if you said, hey, it's cut and sew, that needs to be, that's good in Vietnam and India. If it's injection molded items, okay, do we, go in the US and Mexico? So what is the regional area? What are they good at? What are they known for? And leverage that. Second piece that becomes critical is really what's the location to the tier 2? A lot of people will look at, and a lot of companies, this happens a lot with large companies, they'll move into a location and say, hey, we're excited, it's a high labor item we're doing, we have good government incentives, here's what our cost should be, we're adding a new factory, et cetera. What they haven't really contemplated is that their supply chain is far away. So I had an example of this within SunPower, where we started a new factory, got going, and really realized that our entire supply chain, was weeks away from a shipping standpoint, and it just added from an inventory, shipping cost, complexity, everything else. So all the hidden costs we had not comprehended in developing that and diversifying that supply base. The third part on a positive side potentially is how you can manage your required flexibility, and we'll talk on the entire impact of planning and what's happening with planning. But one of the things you can look at is, hey, if I have a supply chain in Asia and I want to go closer to me, whether that's Mexico or the US, I can create more flexibility in my demand patterns, right? So if something I'm shipping by ocean takes 6 to 8 weeks between, customs and receipt, and I can get a supplier who manages my fluctuations out there, and and put them in Mexico or put them in the US, I have some diversification, but I also have a flexible demand pattern out there that I can shift. Third piece is really the geopolitical. So I think there's, some of that's obvious, but especially if you're in one country today, what's happening out there, both from a, US and US government standpoint, but also from a tariffs and duty standpoint as well. Another item to look at that doesn't get a lot of attention is where's the government want to take the business? So I'll go into, a little bit, for example, of China. China's strategically moving away from high labor content areas. And so they're not going to be incentivized to invest in that. And so you don't want to be saying, hey, I'm going to do something that's high labor content in a country that's trying to not be perceived and not have their business be high labor content, right? They want to keep moving up that value chain. And so when you're working with saying, hey, I want to go into a country, if you said, hey, it's, I'm looking at India, Vietnam, Mexico, where are they trying to take their country? Is it just, hey, we're initially leveraging the labor that we have in place, or is it, we've already done that and we want to move up the value chain and really become that high value added country?
So Mike, before you jump into logistics and jump
Yep.
into social environment requirements, when you're thinking about these considerations, how are you finding this information? Oftentimes people ask me is, okay, what country is good at doing this, or what how do I know what these governments are doing? And then, what do you do? Are you putting it in a spreadsheet? Are you kind of organizing it on a balanced scorecard? What's kind of the approach, or what you should think about from, someone who's starting out, or somebody who's, really has a valuable supply chain already set up?
Yeah, great question. And it is a balanced scorecard. And, ahead of time, you need to look at how you're going to weight and what areas you're weighting. Some of them are just evaluations based on Google searches from that, right? There's not a ton of science. And I'll touch on that on the, social environmental piece. But, and then some of it, obviously, you can pull data from. You can go out and, whether it's Google searches or other data, but you can pull what's the labor rates doing in a given country, what's the what do the tariff structure look like, what's the raw materials, raw materials is a big example where, steel prices in China versus steel prices in the US, they're very different. And so if you have something that has a high raw material content to it, that becomes a big item as well. So, but to your question, it's the balance scorecard's critical. Pulling in, whether it's these categories or others or more, I would put each of those into it and try to look at this across the board and where do we want to target. And then it becomes the physical, in a lot of cases, get boots on the ground and go walk those locations.
Absolutely. And for those that don't know, the balanced scorecard is, listing all your variables, rating those variables on a scale of maybe 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, and then going through and rating those as you determine the results of that. And then finally adding up all your results to determine what's the best course of action. So you can search that more on the internet as well.
Yep. Next area is really around logistics. And this becomes critical. And I think a lot of us are seeing it today, but look at, especially when you're looking at countries with really strong logistics, both for people, whether it's your teams that are going in to spend time there, so good airports, et cetera. And then also shipping, whether it's air freight or ocean freight, but things that can get in and out easy and efficiently, make a large impact on your business long term. And then social and environmental requirements. So obviously we always, everyone should be and continues to pay attention to the CSR side of it. But it also, a lot of that gives you front end indicators for where businesses are going or countries are going and what the business relationship is going to be. Another example, we were looking at a site, and one that scored really one of the best of anything in Myanmar. And at the end of the day, we just said we can't do it because of the social environmental aspects, which today seemed like a brilliant decision. At the time, it was one of those, well, the numbers add up and this makes sense, but it really, was one of those, okay, I'm going to do this because it just doesn't seem right between, some of the social and environmental considerations they have. Okay, pivoting into logistics, and I touched on at the beginning of right now we're seeing constraints everywhere, right? Port congestion, carrier congestion, and trying to get something on, if you're trying to negotiate with even just UPS, FedEx, there's no negotiation happening, and especially if you were doing it over the holidays this year. You were just begging for capacity, not really trying to negotiate any pricing. And then cost increases are coming. So it's not a great time, in the logistics world, or to be somebody utilizing it. I wouldn't say there's any quick fixes out there, but some some opportunities and things to look at. First of all, the Long Beach port, if you're shipping through it today, seems to be one of, extremely constrained and challenges. Look at other locations, other ports. Oakland's does well, and it gets you more central US. Vancouver and actually Ensenada are two good ports that I've used and looked at in the past as well. And then if you're coming across from the East Coast, Houston seems to be fairly good right now. I think it's somewhat of kind of the oil industry slowing while others are picking up. So those are opportunities as well, especially if you're delivering to the East Coast from Asia. You don't lose a ton of time. Another area that we've been looking at and leveraging is direct or fast vessels. So these are port to port shipments. So if it comes out of Hong Kong, direct to Oakland, or direct to Long Beach, something of that nature, that takes out a week or two of kind of this whole bus stop, go through the port to port stops on the deliveries. Another thing for especially a lot of the smaller companies on the line today to look at is, can you leverage your large suppliers, right? So if you have a 3PL partner who's a large multinational, a DHL or a Geodis or Kuehne+Nagel, somebody like that, can you leverage, your 3PL suppliers, your freight forwarders, or even your UPS fulfillment suppliers out there that can help you and help push things through? They obviously carry a lot of weight, and that's part of their value proposition. Sometimes you're paying more for them, but in today's environment, it's, a lot of times that's needed. I would also encourage people to change the conversation, right? It's easy to get caught into the transactional conversations today. Hey, I need to get this from this location to that location, and you're kind of just trying to solve the problem of the day. If you can change it to more of the long-term relationship, the suppliers and the carriers are coming along much better to help through those items as well. Look at consolidating your business. And the more you do, the more you have an opportunity to improve your negotiating power. And then look at where contracts will help. Right now, your ability to negotiate is low. Both, especially for a lot of you, you're kind of in our business isn't that large yet. We're growing the business, but contract protection can help on a case-by-case basis. And, it's always good to buy low, sell high. And it's definitely in the market's high and frothy right now, but, you may have to get in and bite the bullet and invest and get a contracts as well.
And so, Mike, in terms of, thinking about this on an annual basis, are there times that it's better to start looking into this discussion throughout the year? I know closer to you get to Chinese New Year, rates go really high. We know that rates are literally doubled right now on most shipping as it is. Any advice on terms of how you look at this on an annual basis?
Timing, and I don't have a great reasoning for it. Timing usually seems to be spring seems to be when people are the most interested in negotiating. I don't know if that's because it's the low period, as you mentioned. Holidays and getting product over prior to the holidays. So really kind of going from the, October and then through Chinese New Year. So October to February always seems to be tight and people are confident on what the upcoming year is going to be. And then I think there's a little bit of, hey, our confidence, what we thought didn't necessarily come through. And so we're willing to negotiate a little bit. That's the logic I'd use. But from a history standpoint, what I've seen is usually the spring, kind of right now, is when the best time to negotiate.
Okay.
Okay. Last slide here I'll touch on is really planning. And, I think as you look into 2021, as we've shifted from, kind of this crazy COVID world of 2020, and we're still seeing the effects of it. And, whether it's what you're seeing on, in the traditional supply chain world of semiconductors and that type of thing, or just personally where you're fighting to, if you need you're fighting for housing, or if you need to do some home improvement, the cost of any, wood product, anything else continues to skyrocket out there. So it's happening, and it's happening in specific categories, and they continue to have that whipsaw effect. The first thing I would encourage to this team is the traditional SIOP planning process still works, and it works at whatever size the companies are. It's just a matter of how much you want to implement inside of that. But traditionally, what you look at is a 1-month planning cycle. The first one with demand submission. So the sales team, the planning team submits their demand. Then you have a supply response. So the supply organization is coming back and saying, okay, this is what we can actually do. And then you reconcile that gap. Both of those pieces on the first portion, because you're getting a lot of false signals, a lot of suppliers not able to respond correctly and not meet the capacity, that's where the criticality of this all comes together. Of we need to understand, what's real in the demand, why is that demand there, and I would encourage everyone to really keep double clicking on what's the demand and why is it there, and is it true, or is it people overreacting to to what happened in 2020? And it can happen either way, right? It can happen in outdoor industry, things went crazy in 2020, and will those demand signals continue? Or the opposite of the hospitality industry, things went down dramatically. Will those how will that recover? And really working to understand that. And then secondly, being able to respond to it from a supply chain standpoint, both up and down, and building that resiliency and flexibility into the supply chain. The bullwhip effect really says the further you get away from your signal, your true demand signal, the more that whipsaws, the more it gets larger as you go out, and you start to see these false signals come in. So if a retailer expects that their demand is going to go up, they may put in their forecast, and then they'll put they'll fudge their forecast a little. Then they'll submit that to their salesperson, and that salesperson will fudge it, put in a fudge factor, and it kind of just keeps working its way up the supply chain until you end up ultimately with potential inventory issues. So,
and for instance, we're kind of talking about, like we talked about that earlier, about the biking industry, kind of the outdoor heating space with a lot of outdoor heaters and outdoor furniture. This would be kind of the situation where people were doubling down in 2020 because you couldn't go anywhere. And now they're kind of faced with like how to manage their process and supply chain moving forward. Is that a little bit
exactly? And what's it going to do? And really, when you look at, and then the second piece to it gets into the channel inventory, right? So how much do you have visibility to what's in the channel and what's happening to that product out there? So a lot of it today, you say, hey, I've got, you may only have what you feel is a month's worth of inventory in your warehouse or what you're holding on to. But do you know what, if you're doing FBA and selling through Amazon, what do they have and how much? If you're selling into some retail channels, what do they have and how much do they have in inventory? So understanding not just your personal inventory, but what's in the channel and how that's moving.
I think that's a great perspective, because I was talking to one of our last experts from the last final hour, Eric Howard, and I was talking to him, and he was telling me about kind of thinking about his retail strategy, and I was saying to him, how many products, how much inventory does your stores have on deck, and how much do they have online, and kind of going through those questions with him. And I think people don't really think about that. Not only what's in your warehouse, but what's in all the other warehouses for people that are selling your product, I think is critically important as well.
Well, and they become the opposite way of the bullwhip effect that you were just asking about, right? When you say, hey, you have an overreaction and you can't get a bike or you can't get a heater, well, what's going to happen, this summer or fall for, people trying to buy heaters and, or generators in Texas, right? They're going to run out and they're going to stock up their shelves. They're going to put a few on the floor, but they're going to have a whole lot in WIP. And then you're going to sit there and say, wow, I'm selling a lot and everything's exciting and things are going well. And then you're going to realize, well, how come, it's not flowing through? So
yeah, exactly.
Now one of the benefits, of the world kind of continuing to go faster and faster to e-commerce is you have a much faster and truer signal, right, to the changes. So if the demand's truly going up, you should be able to see that coming through in the e-commerce versus in the retail side of the business.
That's a great perspective.
But I would encourage everyone, as you're looking at your inventory, don't just look in, what you have at your warehouse. Look at what's in the entire channel, because that will give you a better signal for what you truly need to be ordering. Another piece is look and understand your tier 2. So we talked at the beginning about tier 2 suppliers and what is constrained in that, right? So it goes back to beyond just the, hey, I have a tier 2 part and it's made in the Wuhan region. But if that's a constrained component, then what do you need to do to secure it? And you're seeing today, what we're seeing a lot of is companies buying those components, either personally holding them or buying them and shipping them to the person who's going to build it and having them specifically hold it for them as well. But then also, you have suppliers and they should be held accountable. They should have some responsibility to go make that happen. So hold them accountable, hold them to understanding what's happening through their entire supply chain. And then finally, look at opportunities to build flexibility into your supply chain, looking at the entire value stream, the entire network. Look at what you can build of a portion regionally, especially for the teams here. Good way to do it. You look and you say, I'm gonna have a supplier in India and I'm gonna have a supplier in Mexico. The supplier in India is going to provide kind of my, bread, milk, eggs type items, my constant things that I can plan every day, and people are going to consume that. And then my supplier in Mexico is going to provide, the special stuff that we're going to buy, on a daily, weekly basis. So create that supply chain so you have the flexibility, or create it to where one, your supplier of India provides, 80%, and then the other guy is the one that's flexing. But you keep that standard signal going through one. And then the final is look where you can change with your suppliers to configure at the last minute. a simple example I'll use from Yeti because it's an easy one, is if you take your steel cups, we would have an 8-week lead time out there where really it got paint. I could predict that your standard cup, I could predict very logically how many we needed to build. I just couldn't predict the color. Well, it only takes a day to paint it, right? So it was one of those where you'd say, okay, I'm going to tell you how many I need. You need to plan, your manufacturing capacity to X. You need to plan your raw material to X, and at the last minute, we're going to tell you what color we want it, and then you just paint it, to that. So those are opportunities. Obviously, everyone can kind of use that to how they've done it in their cases as well. And with that, Stephen, a big thank you to yourself, but a thank you to everyone else, and we'll open it up for questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So if anybody has any questions, you can go ahead and type it into the question chat, and Mike will go ahead and answer. I want to take this time, Mike, thank you. That was awesome. Very valuable information, especially now as it seems like supply chains are all over the place in terms of a roller coaster ride these days, but that was certainly great information in terms of helping us navigate it. If you're interested in booking some time with Mike as an expert through the Gembah Expert platform, you can do so by going to the website, or you can email us at bookanexpert@gmail.com, and you can go ahead and book some time with Mike. We'll go ahead and respond to you and get you set up with Mike so you can find some time for him to provide some great advice on your supply chain. First question we have is, can you give us a little bit more detail on what a direct or fast vessel is and how you would go about shopping for these services?
Sure. So they are port-to-port vessels, and so especially if you're doing large ports. So I'll take the Hong Kong to Long Beach as kind of the key example. You should be able to find, some will do stops along the way and some will go specifically port to port. And then as you're working, if you're working with freight forwarders, they can define, okay, what the shipping time is for the different carriers as well. So there are ones that will be specific of this, this carrier, this location is going to only be a 2-week shipping time from Hong Kong to Long Beach, and be very, direct, and they can do some prioritization of what gets packaged, on the vessel when, so it gets taken off faster as well.
Awesome. Another question is, how do you locate suppliers in Mexico or India?
Well, and I think there's a couple pieces, and I'll kind of do first the plug. I think that's part of what Gembah can help with the team, having a network there. The easiest, kind of a lot of it comes through history of locations, what they're good at. If you take Mexico, for example, if you said Monterrey versus Hermosillo versus Ensenada, what is good in each of those areas? And they do differ, kind of their city and regional expertise. Personally, I look at it from the standpoint of understanding what the expertise is. Then you kind of say, okay, based on that, I want to go, really look at Guadalajara, because we're going to do a high level of, precision manufacturing, and they're really good at that. So we'll go in there, and then you're just going in boots on the ground and looking at, okay, who are the top suppliers in the area, and let's meet with them. A lot of times, whether it's Gembah or others, you can get connections into those suppliers in those areas.
Awesome. Yeah, I know a lot of people ask us, obviously Gembah has a huge network of factories, and and factory partners across the world. So if you're interested, you can also reach out, as Mike said, and we can help you with that. Before I go to the next question, I just want to let you know we'll launch a poll here. If you're interested in reaching out to somebody at Gembah, just go ahead and click yes on the poll, and we can get in touch with you that way as well. So I'll go ahead and launch that. And then the next question is, we talked about this earlier, but is it still cost prohibitive to manufacture in the US? What is manufacturing in the US like? A little bit just information in terms of what you have experience in that realm.
No, it's a great question. And the answer is it all depends, first of all. So first and foremost is really what comes down to shipping costs. If you're talking big, large items, that it usually makes sense to manufacture it in the US or potentially in Mexico. But a lot of that'll get, a lot of your cost saving, labor savings, everything else, if you buy from elsewhere, gets eaten up in the US. The second part is how critical time is in whatever you're doing, right? And so and I'd say time in two ways. One, time to develop the product, right? So if I need to do fast cycles of learning, fast cycles of development, my experience is having local suppliers is key and critical to that. And then second, if I need to have flexibility in my supply chain, having suppliers in the US is important. And then the other factor comes down to level of automation, right? So the factories a lot of US factories will automate and be much more lean and efficient than what you'll see elsewhere. And they're able to compete head to head. So manufacturing in the US is still strong, still has definitely a clear place for your business. And it kind of, at the end of the day, it depends on labor cost, speed, and really the size and everything else of the product that you're buying.
Awesome. That's a great answer. And so the last question, we'll end on this one. Again, Mike, thanks so much for your time today. Hugely valuable. What's the best way to assess a manufacturer's capability of custom or new products?
It's a great question, and I'll give you kind of an indirect answer. Not, there's not a specific, there's clearly tools you can use to measure their quality, measure their capability, but the first part comes into testing them in the product, right? So I personally, the things I typically will do is spend time at the supplier, walk the lines, understand their engineering team, their development team, and what their capabilities are. Especially spending time with them, you can get a feel for what are they capable of, where are their weaknesses, do they truly understand the product, are they able to respond, to develop it like you're looking for. Then you'll have obviously the more technical piece of here's the specifications, here's the requirements, can you do it? But then you test them to it, right? You buy some samples or you have them deliver some samples. So it's an iterative process. It's going to take a few iterations, and especially I think from this team, people who are passionate about what they're designing and developing is, you know your product better than they do, and you're going to be more choosy than they are and critical of it. And I would spend the time to understand, do they have that same feeling, or are they just, trying to shoot something out to you so they can get a sale? So that part you'll get a feel for pretty quickly. And then I would apply kind of the standard traditional, here's my technical requirements, and here's how I test the quality of the end product capability.
Awesome. Well, Mike, thank you again. Thank you for everyone who attended. Again, you can visit us at gembah.com if you want to find some more information. But again, a big thanks to Mike. We really appreciate your time here today.
Definitely. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, everyone.